Now I will introduce you the talk by Linda O'Gorman. Linda is another well-known personality in IAPR. She has been precious across the years, and she can witness what happened through the years in both our association, but also in general. So please, Linda, now I will leave you the screen so that you can delight us with your talk.
Let's hope.
Okay.
Over there. Let me know if you can hear me, and also if you can see the screen. You should.
Wow.
If you see the screen,
Beautiful
you see
dog.
my beautiful dog. Yes. May she rest in peace. Okay. But now you should see
Perfect.
the first slide of my talk. Yes? All good? So since this is the inaugural edition of the W4PR workshop, it makes sense, I think, to start with an overview of women's involvement in the IAPR. And I'm really honored to have been asked to present this talk. While I'm not a researcher, if you read my bio, you know that, I've attended ICPR since 1998, and I've worked for the IAPR since 2003. During that time, as Marilena hinted at, I've become kind of an IAPR historian. And as Ingela mentioned earlier, this talk will review the history of gender balance or imbalance, whichever way you want to look at it, within the IAPR, and make specific note of the initiatives that were begun to reduce that imbalance. So I'm going to start with an IAPR timeline. The IAPR essentially began in 1973 at the first International Joint Conference on Pattern Recognition in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Also in that year, the American tobacco company Philip Morris, they manufactured Virginia Slim cigarettes, which were cigarettes for women specifically. They were continuing their ad campaign that had the slogan, "You've come a long way, baby." So as you listen to this brief history of the role of women in the IAPR, I'm inviting you to consider whether you think that women in the IAPR have indeed come a long way. For those of you who are new to the IAPR, I don't know how many, I know most of you know, but I'll just do a quick run through to look at the structure. So the IAPR is an association of national societies that are interested in pattern recognition and its allied fields. Each society has a representative on the governing board. The overall running of the IAPR is managed by the executive committee and then whatever standing committees there are. In 1978, when the IAPR was incorporated, there were 11 national societies. Today, there are 50 national societies, the executive committee, and we've got, how many? We've got many standing committees, one special committee, which I expect will become a standing committee after the governing board meetings this week, and then 11 technical committees. Oh, 17. Alexandra could have corrected me on that one. So now let's look at a timeline of women's involvement in the IAPR, and then I'm going to take a closer look at some specific aspects of that timeline. So I've already mentioned in 1973, we have the first ICPR and the formation of the continuing International Joint Committee on Pattern Recognition that was chaired by Professor King-Sung Fu. In 1978, the IAPR is incorporated in the state of New York. There it is. Okay, in 1981, Ruzhna became the first woman IAPR newsletter, and therefore the first woman to be on one of the IAPR standing committees. In 1988, a familiar name to all of us, Gunilla Boyfors becomes the first woman named to the IAPR governing board representing Sweden. At the time, there were 32 governing board members, and Gunilla was the only woman. In 1990, another first, Gunilla is the first woman elected to the executive committee. 1994 is when the first fellows are named. And if I recall correctly, Gunilla was instrumental in proposing that fellows be nominated and named. Unfortunately, she was not among the first women named as fellows. In 1998, she and another familiar name now, Leila De Floriani, are named as IAPR fellows. They're the first women with that honor. In 2000, we have Gabriela Saniti de Baia as this first woman president of the IAPR. 14 years later, Ingela becomes only the second woman president. 2014, as has been mentioned, we have the governing board approving the Maria Petru Prize. 2016, the initiative that Ingela mentioned towards diversity in nominations. This was published in the newsletter, and then there was a related essay as well from the editor's desk. 2016, Michael Arani is the first recipient of the Maria Petru Prize. 2016 also, we have the first women at ICPR coffee breaks and lunches. In 2018, the first IAPR Her Story, contributed by Gabriela, is published in the newsletter. The Special Committee on Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion is formed. And now here we are in, well, 2021, with this Women for Pattern Recognition workshop to celebrate women's contributions to the IAPR. At this point, I'd like to take a closer look at the executive committees, governing boards, and standing committees and women's involvement in those, beginning with the executive committees. The executive committee, or EXCO, is elected for 2-year terms by the governing board at ICPRs. There's a president, first vice president, second vice president, past president, secretary, and treasurer, so 6 positions. And from 1990 till present day, there's been a woman in at least one of these positions. This table shows the history of EXCOs, and the purple highlighted, purple being the color of the IAPR, show the women on the EXCO. This graph of governing board participation shows a relatively steady, if a little bumpy, increase in the number of women serving on the governing board. And with standing committees, Section 8.1 of the IAPR Constitution says that the governing board shall set up standing committees as deemed necessary to conduct the business of the IAPR. So we saw that women started appearing on standing committees in 1981, which is really the very early days of the IAPR. And this graph of the percentage of women on standing committees shows a definite upward trend, which we like to see. I don't know if you can see clearly the top number here, which is 35%. So a reasonable representation. It's possible, I think, that these trends, these upward trends, would have happened even without any actions on the part of the IAPR, just based on time and other movements in society and whatever other motivators there would have been. But there were specific actions, and I'm going to apologize here that there's redundancy between this slide and the timeline slide, but I think it's good to see it again in this different context. Okay, from 2009, there was a conscious decision from the IAPR newsletter editorial staff to invite women to contribute to 2 feature series. One is called Getting to Know IAPR Fellows, The title, I think, is probably obvious for what those are about. And then the other is IAPR, the Next Generation, which was a feature series that was started when Alexandra, one of our co-chairs here today, was the newsletter editor. And that is meant to highlight up-and-coming researchers, the next generation of researchers. So with the passing of Professor Maria Petru in October of 2012, some prominent members of the IAPR community proposed a new prize at ICPR 2012 at the governing board meeting there. And that prize was meant to be specifically for women in honor of Maria's memory. And this was approved the prize itself was approved at the governing board meeting in 2012. We've seen the cover of the newsletter with this famous initiative encouraging gender diversity in nominations for IAPR awards. This was drafted, circulated to member societies and committees through their governing board members, and then publicized in the IAPR newsletter. A follow-up essay was published in the next from the editor's column called What Can You Do to Help Achieve Gender Balance? We want to hear your thoughts. Please, the newsletter does want to hear your thoughts. I'll put in a little plug here. People seldom write to the editors of the newsletter, but it is a good way to make your voice heard within the IAPR community. The EXCO also began encouraging conference organizers to invite women as keynote speakers at IAPR sponsored and endorsed events. We've mentioned this before for the with the EXCO and the organizers of ICPR 2016 organized events for women to help foster new connections. The EXCO and the newsletter editorial staff worked together to launch the IAPR Her Story series. We discussed what that series would try to convey, and we proposed some names of people who could contribute. And the idea was to have later career researchers as well as earlier career researchers. And the first of those, of course, was Gabriella. So in 2018, the Special Committee on Equity, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion was approved and formed at that governing board meeting. And that brings us to the work of the organizers of this workshop, men and women, to bring us all here today. Before I conclude my talk, I'd like to take a quick look at the prizes and awards. We are, as Angela mentioned, and as the numbers will attest, there is not anywhere near a balance in the presentation of the awards. But if we are conscious about looking to nominate more women, I think that that could be, we could certainly move towards that. There are 4 prizes that we'll talk about. The King Sung Fu Prize is presented to a living person in recognition of an outstanding technical contribution to the field of pattern recognition. There have been no women among the 17 recipients of the King Sung Fu Prize. For the J.K. Agarwal Prize, the recipient is a young scientist under the age of 40 at the date of the deadline for nominations, who has brought a substantial contribution to a field that is relevant to the IAPR community and whose research work has had a major impact on the field. There have been 2 women among the 8 recipients. The Maria Petru Prize is awarded to a living female scientist or engineer who has made substantial contributions to the field of pattern recognition or closely related fields, and whose past contributions, current research activity, and future potential may be regarded as a model to both aspiring and established researchers. We saw their pictures earlier. There's been 3 women who've received this honor now. And the last we'll discuss is the IAPR Fellow Award, which is conferred on persons to acknowledge their distinguished contributions and IAPR activities. This statistic is the worst in the lot. 21 women among the 281 fellows. Now, the other thing I just want to mention here is the language of the qualifications for the awards struck me. We talked, Ingela talked a little bit about language and the way women are referred to versus men, but the other aspect is how much more seems to be expected of a woman to receive an award than perhaps the general population. So here we have, I mean, obviously the KSU award is the highest honor the ICPR bestows. So obviously outstanding really means outstanding. But the list of qualifications for a woman to receive the Maria Petrus Prize just really struck me as a lot. It really speaks so well of the recipients. I'll mention Rita here because she's in the room. Okay, so as I prepared this talk and looked at the names of those in the IAP, those women involved in the IAPR from the early days through now, I noticed many of the same women taking different roles within the IAPR over the decades, whether it was from a standing committee to the EXCO, or from the governing board to the EXCO to a standing committee, or all of the above. The same names kept popping up over and over. They stayed involved. They encouraged others to get and stay involved. They promoted initiatives within the IAPR and made changes within the organization to make it easier for other women that perhaps it had been for themselves. So this mental image that I formed of these strong women, these role models, reminded me of the parting advice of one of the speakers at my daughter's university graduation. The woman was Estelle Richmond, and she was receiving an honorary Doctor of Laws. And she left the students with the message, as you achieve your goals, remember you never do it alone. Go back and help one other person. Before we go to the breakout rooms, I was asked to maybe propose some guiding questions for you. I led the talk with the main guiding question, which is, have women come a long way within the IAPR? Some other questions that we could think about are, have women come far enough? Does the number of women matter? If there are more women involved, does it necessarily follow that they will have more opportunities? Can you have high quality interaction for women without high numbers of women colleagues? What should the goal be within the IAPR for women's participation? Should it mirror the population as a whole? Should it be 50-50? Besides the initiatives that we've mentioned and workshops like this one, what else can the IAPR do to help women succeed? And echoing the words of Estelle Richmond, what can each of you do to help each other? So I thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms.